Hi, everybody. So, for week number 10, we are looking at threats to internal validity, kind of building on what we talked about last week in week number 9, where a couple of these things were mentioned related to simple experiments. So, we will review those three threats that we talked about before, kind of talk about some bad experiments, some other potential threats to internal validity in different types of designs. Are then experiments still useful with all of these issues? We'll kind of get into all of that this week in this week's content. So, building on what we talked about last time, right? So, last week we talked about three different threats. So, these should be familiar. We talked about design confounds, selection effects, and order effects. So design confounds were when another variable is varying systematically. It creates noise. It's like a confounding variable or an extraneous variable. Selection effects when different independent variable groups have systematically different participants, especially in an independent group's design. And then order effects where there's a change due to the order in which the levels of the variable are presented in a within groups design. So what we're looking at again, remember with internal validity, was the research done right? Are our findings valid and accurate and so on? And so building on these three, we're going to talk about some other ones that are really common threats. But before we get there, just a little kind of, it says the really bad experiment, but just a couple of examples. And what you'll see is that something is missing, right? So a one group pre-test, post-test design, right? So with these, what we have participants who are measured, they receive a treatment, and then there's something that we measure again. Okay, so pre-test, post-test, one group. So for example, if we have a group of campers and we measure rowdy behavior, and then we reduce their sugar and measure rowdy behavior again. Or we have women who are depressed, we measure their depression, we give them cognitive therapy, and then we measure their depression again. So while on the surface this might seem adequate, if you look at the graphs, there's something missing, right? We have like the beginning to the end, pre-therapy, post-therapy, but we don't have, oops, sorry, we don't have anything to compare it to. Really important to look at these other things that are going on. What else could explain these effects? Did something else happen? Was there another group that were involved, right? There's more complicated than simply just looking at one group of people and one thing in particular in isolation. So that's kind of part of what we're looking at in this chapter is that these different elements can be threats to actually making any kind of valid or accurate conclusion. So anytime you read an experiment, anytime you read an article or a conclusion or even a headline, really important to look at what did they actually do? Did they control for some of these different threats that we're going to talk about, especially in these like one group pre-test, post-test designs. So what we'll look at maturation threats, history threats, regression threats, attrition, testing, and instrumentation. So kind of six more potential problems that can pop up and interfere with our results. So starting with the first one, maturation threats is when there's a change in behavior that emerges spontaneously over time. Oops, sorry, I was changing slides on us here. So the campers, we measure rowdy behavior, we reduce sugar, and then we measure rowdy behavior again, right? Maybe there was some kind of change that happened over time as they grow stronger or they grow tired or impatient or whatever it might be. The rowdy behavior might be affected by something else, some kind of change in the behavior that happened like spontaneously. And so one of the ways that we can measure this or kind of capture this is by having a comparison group. What if we have a comparison group that we didn't do anything with their sugar, and then we compare the rowdy behavior with them versus the rowdy behavior with the one that we reduce the sugar of those campers. So maturation is when something matures or changes spontaneously over time. A history threat is when an external factor affects most members of the treatment group. It's a systemic kind of thing that is affecting everyone. So, for example, if you have a bunch of campers, right, or participants, and then we do our pretest measure, like measuring their rowdy behavior again, and then a treatment like reducing sugar, and then a post-test of measuring their behavior, what if something else happened in here and it happened to most of the campers? Trying to think of what that might be. I was never a camper, right? But maybe there was something that happened with the weather, right? Like maybe the weather changed and it affected most of the people, and it might change their behavior when it had nothing to do with the sugar, right? So again, we prevent these and measure these and capture these by having a comparison group. So if we had a comparison group and they all experienced this like weather change, for example, we wouldn't see much of a change between the reduced sugar and the group that got nothing, because we could then account for this history threat. Regression threat and a chance to bring up football. Oh my gosh, do I love football. Regression threat or regression to the mean. If the group mean or average is unusually extreme at time one, time two will likely be less extreme. So, for example, if Germany versus Brazil, if the score is 7-1, how many game or goals, I should say, will Germany score next game? Right? Probably less, right? It's more likely to revert back to or regress to the mean. Unlikely to have these combo of random factors happen again, such as maybe injuries or the weather, or maybe the captain was sidelined, or there was a certain number of like fouls or penalties that led to whatever. So we see this a lot in football, right? And I'm a big fan of fantasy football and all of that stuff related to football. There's something called touchdown regression. There was a season a few years ago where Julio Jones, like one of the best receivers in the league at the time, no longer, right? But at the time, he like had zero touchdowns, and everyone kept saying, "Oh, eventually we're going to see some touchdown regression, touchdown regression." If you have a really good like receiver or running back who hasn't scored a touchdown, it's likely coming, right? And so that's kind of the idea here that things tend to be less extreme the second time around, right? They tend to regress back to what is expected and back to the mean. Just something to be aware of. Attrition threat is when participants drop out systematically, right? So with attrition threats, let's say we have the campers, we measure their rowdy behavior, people drop out as we reduce their sugar, and then we measure the rowdy behavior again, but the rowdy campers had to go home for some reason, right? Like there's something where people leave or drop out that is going to kind of change the results that we see. So preventing attrition threats, we remove the scores from the pretest as well as the post-test. So you have to remove their entire score, or at least check to see if the pretest is close to average, and then you might be able to leave it. And then we typically note this in the discussion and the results and so on as well. Very common threat that you start with a certain number of people, and then unfortunately there's attrition and people drop out. Testing and instrumentation threats. Testing threat is an order effect where you're exposed to the dependent variable twice, so you're better because of practice, or maybe worse because you're bored. Testing threats can be prevented by having like a post-test only, a comparison group, different forms of the dependent variable, like a different depression questionnaire, for example. Let's say that you give people a different one the first time and the second time, you split it in half. Sometimes like a split half test can be another way around this. But this one is because people are changing, you see a change in their score because they're either getting better or maybe they're like bored or they've fallen off in some way with their level of like interest and focus. Instrumentation threat, on the other hand, is when the measuring instrument changes over time. So we change the standards of scoring, or it's a different pre-test, post-test form that is not equivalent. So with an instrumentation threat, it is the instrument or the test or whatever it is you're using that has changed. With a testing threat, it's the participants that have changed. Sometimes confused, right? So something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Three potential threats in any experiments, right? So those were ones that might be more likely under certain conditions, but these can happen under any condition. Observer bias and demand characteristics. Researchers have expectations oftentimes of what they are hoping to find or expect to find. I love this. So if it's good, it's Mr. Coffee. If it's bad, it's me, right? Like you're expecting something. And sometimes your expectations might influence your interpretation of the results. Or we see with demand characteristics that the participants maybe guess what the study is supposed to be about. And so they kind of go in favor of what they have determined it to be related to. So with both of these, we see that either the researcher or the participants or both are kind of guiding the results in some small way. One of the ways that we can get around this is to do like a double blind study or even a masked study. In a double blind, neither the participants or the researchers know who's in the treatment group versus the control group or comparison group. In that case, right, there's less influence and less expectation because you don't know who is in which group. Or maybe you do a masked study where the researchers themselves are unaware, right? By changing things and like kind of keeping the information under wraps in a way, you might be able to minimize some of that observer or demand characteristic bias. Placebo effects are also really common. We see them a lot. Placebos and can be a powerful way to experience something, right? When you believe after receiving treatment, you start to improve, right? You produce like real effects, right? You might reduce real symptoms, both psychologically or physically. Let's say you are in a study where half of the people are getting an antidepressant and half are getting a placebo. And the placebo group might show 75% of an improvement, right? We're seeing an improvement in both groups because of the expectation that you're receiving something that might be helpful. This can also be negative, like if there's a side effect of having rashes or something like that, you might end up with a rash because you expected to, even though you got the placebo or the one without any active ingredients. So what we do with placebo effects is you might even have a double-blind placebo control study. That's a mouthful, right? Where nobody knows, right? The participants don't know which group they're in or that there is a placebo. The researchers don't know who received the placebo versus who received the active ingredient. Everybody is kind of blind, right? And so then you hope that that minimizes some of those beliefs that might then affect the results. So with so many threats, because there are so many different threats to experiments, are they still useful? Yes, of course, right? But you have to be really careful how you design them. When you're designing an experiment, you must consider like what are the different threats? What is most likely to be a problem with this research? And how can I address it? How can I counter it? How can I correct for it? Many threats can be controlled with like a carefully designed comparison or control group. So as long as you set your experiment up well, you should be in pretty good shape. And luckily, you have things like the IRBs and different review boards to kind of examine some of these things. Or if you're doing research as like a graduate student, you have an advisor who's going to help you think about these things. And oftentimes we can minimize the errors and the issues as long as we think about them kind of critically and think ahead. And what about zero effects? Kind of one more thing that we talked a little bit about. When you have a zero effect or a null effect, the independent variable has not exercised any influence on the dependent variable. There seems to be no significant covariance between the two. Now, this could mean a couple of things, right? Just because you don't find a result in your experiment doesn't mean that there's no relationship. It could be two like very common outcomes. One, that your research wasn't set up accurately or performed correctly. Maybe you didn't have enough participants, right, to get statistical power. Maybe you didn't account for all the different threats or set it up or do it all correctly. Or it could be that the independent variable doesn't affect the dependent variable, right? So it could be one of two things. And sometimes you have to go back and kind of examine it and look at, are there any missing pieces? Do I have enough people? And maybe conduct it again or like some slight variance of it again to see if you get the same results. But it doesn't necessarily mean it was useless. There's a lot of research done with zero effects. And then we examine it again, maybe with a slightly different spin or angle. So that is everything from week number 10 on threats to internal validity. As always, don't forget to also read through the lecture and watch any videos and everything that are in there. Complete your reading and the links that are posted on Canvas. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will hope to see you all next week for week number 11.